The acrid tang of ionized air and burning flesh clung to the inside of Kaelen's helmet, a familiar perfume of the front. A jagged tear spiderwebbed across his visor, courtesy of a glancing energy blast, blurring the already chaotic scene. Around him, the trench shuddered under the relentless barrage of the Krill's plasma cannons. Every impact felt like a physical blow, shaking the bones in his skull. He coughed, a gritty rattle in his chest. Something sharp was lodged in his side, pressing against his ribs with every breath. He'd felt it go in, a searing agony that had briefly stolen the air from his lungs, but now it was just a dull, persistent throb, a background hum to the symphony of destruction. He'd already dismissed it as manageable. Humans were good at that, at compartmentalizing, at pushing the screaming protests of their own bodies into a locked box in their minds. "Kaelen, left flank crumbling," Rhys's voice crackled over the comms, strained but steady. Rhys, damn him, was probably relatively unscathed. He had that infuriating knack for dodging the worst of it. "On it," Kaelen grunted, levering himself up. His left leg screamed in protest, a wet, sticky pain that suggested something more than just bruising. He ignored it. Ignoring pain was practically a human superpower. He scrambled over the lip of the trench, the impact of Krill energy blasts rocking the ground around him. He saw them then, the Krill, tall, spindly creatures with exoskeletons that shimmered like oil slicks. They moved with an unsettling, jerky grace, their multi-jointed limbs carrying weapons that spat bolts of pure energy. He'd seen them crumple like paper dolls under focused fire. Fragile, that was the word that always came to mind, beautifully, terrifyingly fragile. One Krill, its bulbous head swiveling, spotted him. It raised its weapon, a low hum building in its core. Kaelen reacted instinctively, dropping to a knee and firing his pulse rifle in short, controlled bursts. The Krill's exoskeleton flared where the bolt struck, a brief corona of light before the creature spasmed and collapsed, its limbs twitching. Another Krill, emboldened by its comrade's fall, charged. It wasn't armed with a ranged weapon, but rather wickedly sharp chitinous claws that glinted in the flickering light of the battlefield. It lunged, a screeching war cry tearing from its vocal sacs. Kaelen barely had time to bring his rifle up as a makeshift shield. The claws raked across the weapon's casing, tearing gouges in the metal. One claw snagged on his arm, ripping through his armor and flesh. Pain, sharp and immediate, shot up his arm, followed by the warm, sickening feel of blood. He didn't cry out. He couldn't afford to. Instead, he used the momentum of the attack against the Krill, twisting his body and bringing the butt of his rifle crashing against its head. The sound was sickeningly hollow. The Krill staggered back, its movements less coordinated. Kaelen followed up with a brutal knee to its chest, hearing a sickening crack. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, the taste of blood metallic in his mouth. His arm throbbed, his side ached. His leg felt like it was filled with broken glass, and the ringing in his ears from the near-miss energy blast was a constant drone. By Krill standards, he should be incapacitated, dead even, but he was still standing. He was still fighting. Rhys reached him then, his face grim. "You all right, Kaelen?" Kaelen spat a mouthful of blood onto the churned earth. "Peachy, just a scratch." Rhys's gaze flickered to the ragged tear in Kaelen's armor, the blood seeping through. He didn't comment. He knew better. They all did. "They're pushing hard. Their Centurions are through the outer defenses." Centurions. Those were the problem. Heavily armored, armed with plasma cannons that could vaporize a human in an instant. They were the Krill's heavy hitters, designed to break through fortifications. "Let's give them a warm welcome then," Kaelen said, his voice rough. He ripped a strip of fabric from his undershirt and crudely tied it around his bleeding arm, wincing at the movement. It wouldn't do much, but it was something. They moved together, a grim duo against a tide of alien aggression. They found the breach in the lines, a section of the trench pulverized by the Centurion's plasma fire. Two of the armored behemoths stood amidst the rubble, their cannons spitting bolts of incandescent energy. Scattered around them were the remains of their comrades, vaporized or twisted into grotesque shapes. Kaelen felt a surge of something akin to fury, not the hot, blind rage of a berserker, but a cold, determined anger. He saw the look in Rhys's eyes, the same grim resolve. They were going to make these bastards pay. They moved with practiced efficiency, using the remaining cover to their advantage. Rhys laid down, suppressing fire, his pulse rifle barking. Kaelen, ignoring the agony in his leg, moved forward, his gaze locked on the nearest Centurion. He knew he couldn't go toe-to-toe with it, its armor was too thick, but he also knew its weaknesses. The joints, the sensor arrays, the exposed power couplings. He'd seen enough humans go down fighting these things to learn their vulnerabilities. The Centurion turned its attention to him, its cannons swiveling. Kaelen dodged the first blast, the heat of it searing the air around him. He felt a stinging pain on his cheek, shrapnel. He ignored it. He got close, dangerously close, weaving between the fallen debris. The Centurion lumbered after him, its movements surprisingly agile for its size. It fired again, the plasma bolt narrowly missing him, impacting the ground behind him with an earth-shattering explosion. The force of it threw him forward, slamming him into the Centurion's leg. He felt a sharp, grinding pain in his ribs as he made contact. He gasped, the breath knocked from his lungs. But he was there. He was in its blind spot. He pulled a grenade from his belt, his fingers clumsy with blood. He armed it and jammed it into a seam in the Centurion's leg joint, a vulnerable point he'd witnessed another soldier exploit weeks ago. A soldier who wasn't coming home. The explosion was deafening, throwing Kaelen back. He landed hard, pain erupting in his side and leg. He saw the Centurion stumble, smoke and sparks pouring from its damaged joint. It was still operational, but crippled. Rhys, seeing his opportunity, unleashed a concentrated burst of fire into the exposed joint. The Centurion shuddered, its movements becoming erratic, before finally collapsing with a resounding crash. The second Centurion, its attention diverted, was a quicker kill. Rhys took it down with a well-placed shot to its optics. They stood amidst the wreckage, panting, their bodies screaming in protest. Kaelen felt a warm trickle down his face, the shrapnel wound on his cheek. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, smearing blood across his already grime-streaked skin. A group of Krill soldiers, witnessing the fall of their Centurions, hesitated. They looked at the two humans, battered, bleeding, but still standing, their weapons still raised. Kaelen saw something in their multifaceted eyes. Fear. A primal, instinctive fear. They'd seen humans take hits that would have vaporized their own kind and keep fighting. They'd witnessed a level of endurance that defied their understanding of biology. One of the Krill whimpered, a high-pitched, unsettling sound. Then they broke. They turned and fled, their jerky movements betraying their panic. Rhys let out a shaky breath. They're retreating. Kaelen nodded, a grim satisfaction washing over him. They'd held. Against overwhelming odds, they'd held. But the cost. He could feel it in every ache, every throbbing wound, every ragged breath. Later, back in the makeshift medical bay, a cramped, dimly lit space filled with the moans of the injured, a Krill medic, captured earlier in the battle, stared at Kaelen with undisguised awe and horror. Kaelen lay on a cot, stripped to the waist, his torso a canvas of bruises, burns, and hastily stitched wounds. The medic, a slender creature with delicate, almost translucent skin, flinched every time Kaelen shifted. How are you still functional?" the medic stammered, its voice a series of clicks and whistles translated by a universal translator. "The damage, it is unfathomable." Kaelen shrugged, wincing as the movement pulled at a fresh stitch. "Just built different, I guess." The medic shook its head, its large eyes wide with disbelief. "Your species. You absorb punishment like hardened alloy. We analyzed the telemetry from the battlefield. The energy you withstood. Any of our kind would have been vaporized." Kaelen didn't say anything. He knew what they saw. They saw the bleeding, the broken bones, the singed flesh. But they didn't see the mental fortitude, the relentless will to survive that burned within him, within all humans. They didn't see the lifetime of pushing through pain, the ingrained understanding that quitting wasn't an option. Days later, a grainy recording surfaced on the intergalactic net. Captured by a damaged Krill drone, it showed the final moments of the battle at the breached barricade. The footage was shaky, chaotic, but it clearly showed Kaelen, battered and bleeding, single-handedly taking down a Centurion. The video went viral. Alien commentators from across the known galaxies watched in stunned silence, then in a cacophony of horrified fascination. The Krill were apoplectic, their propaganda about human weakness shattered. Other species, embroiled in their own conflicts, watched with a mixture of dread and grudging respect. The comments section exploded. Among the alien chatter, the bewildered pronouncements, and the frightened warnings, a new phrase emerged, repeated with growing frequency: human tank. The screens flashed and read: E-tank status secure. General. For Kaelen, back on the front lines, bandaged and bruised but already preparing for the next inevitable attack, it was just another day. The pain was there, a constant companion, but so was the resolve. They could break his body, maybe, but they would never break his will. He was human, and that meant something in this brutal, uncaring universe. It meant enduring, it meant fighting, it meant surviving, no matter the cost. And the aliens, with their delicate frames and their fragile constitutions, were slowly, terrifyingly beginning to understand that.